What's up, summoners? King Blair here. Today, for Top 5 Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the top 5 one-shotters in Epic 7. And to make the list a little bit spicier, we're going to make it so it's units that require little to no setup to actually do their one-shotting. So if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and Discord server, link down in the description. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So again, this list is going to be for the top 5 one-shotters that require little to no setup. The reason why is because there's actually a lot of units that do very impressive single target damage if you give them an attack buff with flan and a crit damage buff with flan. And I just wanted to do the units that don't require a lot of setup to do their big damage because I think that's more impressive for the unit, which is going to mean that a lot of the units that are on this list aren't particularly going to be meta, but also talk about them so you know they exist and you know what they can do, and also talk a little bit of where you may be able to even use them. But with that, let's actually jump into the honorable mention. There's quite a few honorable mention because I actually had to go through. I did it for all the top 5 on this, and a lot of the majority ones that are not honorable mention. I actually went through the damage calculator and put their ideal stats to see how much damage they'd actually be doing with their combo and see where they end up. And that's how we got a lot of the honorable mentions, because they were just right there or required a little bit too much setup to actually do their combo. So first, we have none other than top model Luluka. She actually does an impressive amount of damage with the penetration set, with the speed scaling, and just overall really solid single target damage, right? But again, not quite enough compared to other units on this list. But I wanted to mention her because I actually really like top model Luluka, even though she's not currently meta. The big reason being there are way too many other speed threats, and if she's not taking turn 1, it's usually not a good day for her. And again, her damage is a little subpar when it's compared to even some of the top 5 units in this game. So often other units are opted in her place. I do occasionally still bring her out for Guild Wars, but man, I really like this unit. I wish she came back. But again, really solid one-shotter, just not quite there as far as damage. The other one's going to be a Kali. The big reason why Kali didn't make it to the list, even though she has very impressive single target damage with the SS3, is the fact that she needs the souls, and she's not a mage, so she cannot carry her own book, which makes her actually be lower on the list. On the other hand, we also have the assassins, both the assassins and both Sids. So Assassin Sid, really good single target damage. Again, if he had the soul burn, he will do a lot. If he had Gab, he actually does very good single target damage. A lot of cleavers actually use Assassin Sid in their cleaves because of how high his single target damage potential actually is, as well as it takes away a speed contested that they may be using and gives them another speed contested for themselves if they're not cleaving, right? He actually does very impressive single target damage, but again, not the scaling is a little bit more conditional, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is just it doesn't match up to some of the other units on this list. But again, very solid damage overall, just incredibly nice damage for this unit. On the other hand, we have none other than Inferno Kawazu, and the big reason is that he actually needs a lot of setup. That being that if he doesn't have his passive, he most likely is not going to be getting the damage off, because there's a very good chance he'll miss this burns. Either they'll have FRS or he'll just miss them, and without the buff, it doesn't do as much damage. I think my Inferno Kawazu without the Vigor buff does around 12 to 13k, which is very respectable. 13 to 14k is a very good amount of damage, as well as the 2,000-3,000 damage that he does. But 16k is actually not more than a lot of the other units on this list are actually doing. So without that Vigor buff, he doesn't get that true one shot. With the Vigor buff, he's actually like a contender for being one of the highest damage dealing units in the game, just because it's almost like true damage, right? Because burns do ignore part of the defense. Very solid one-shotter, but again, needs a little bit of setup. And last but not least, we have none other than Luna. If we were doing a one-shot list with units that could use some setup, Luna would have absolutely being on this list, because with setup, Luna is a monster single target damage dealer, arguably one of the best single target damage dealing units in the game with a little bit of setup, right? But again, because I wanted to do it with no setup at all, just them doing their damage raw, she sadly does not make this list. But with that, we are getting to the actual top 5. And at number 5, we kind of have a tie between Watcher Shuri and Melon. So first, Watcher Shuri. The big reason why this unit can do so much damage is because he can ignore defense 100%. He's the only unit that ignores 100% defense on the unit that you want. I do know there's another unit that's actually on this list that ignores all the defense, but for the unit that you want, which is really impressive, as well as he can actually do like 18k solid damage without any setup at all, just unconditional 18 to 20k damage as long as he lands at S3, right? The big reason why he's low on this list and what's holding him back is the fact that he actually has very low base stats, even though he does have that one-shot potential, which means that you're not going to be getting as high attack to actually make the most use out of this very high single target damaging skill, which is the reason he's actually low. But a well-built Watcher Shuri can actually do 20k without attack buff, right? Which is very impressive, right? That is very, very, very solid damage unconditionally against any unit, regardless of how much defense they're going to have. On the other hand, we have none other than Melon. And you may be wondering, but you said a colleague can't bring book, so why is Melon on this list? Well, because Melon can actually carry her own book. She is a mage, she can carry her book. She does end up doing a well-built Melon, will be doing around 20k damage on a 1.5k defense unit, which is actually very, very impressive, right? Overall, she could do more damage than Watcher Shuri against squishier targets. But against tankier targets, she's not doing as much damage as something like a Watcher Shuri is going to be doing, since she doesn't get inherent pen in her actual kit. But the fact that she gets to cheat a little bit with a Soulburn S1 into an S3 to do damage is very, very nice. Melon being a very solid option to actually deal with units like Violet, and even being a solid unit to counter RB, which is one of the reasons we also don't see a lot of time on Luruka. Honestly, one of the better Guild Wars units out there because of how much damage she can actually do and how little setup she actually needs, as well as being able to hit a lot of different Violet targets and having that extinction. Very, very solid unit. At number 4, we have, I'm sure it's everyone's favorite unit that no one has ever complained about having to go against, but we have none other than Rimo. This unit does a very, very impressive amount of damage. He does cheat a little bit with the S3 because at worst, he's still doing 5k true damage, but at best, which honestly, as long as you have immunity on your team or you have a single buff on your team, it's a very, very simple setup. He's able to get 10k fixed damage as well as his single target damage. This unit can hit extremely hard. And the reason I know this is because there are some guilds out there that run full damage penetration Rimurus, and their base S3 damage will do 13k on my crawl, and then come in with that nice little fixed damage that he gets, and finalize with that extra damage to just do some ridiculous amount of one-shotting damage. Similar to Watcher Shuri, he's also able to basically ignore no matter how much defense you have. He's guaranteed to get at least 5,000 and most likely going to be getting even higher than that very, very easily. There are very few situations where he doesn't have max buff on the team or where you have 0 buffs on your team. So overall, gonna be getting that damage. I know it's a little bit of cheating, but that's also why I put him lower on this list. But again, very solid unit, very solid one-shotter. He's pretty much used everywhere in Guild Wars, in Arena, in RTA. He's literally everywhere. But now that brings us to the number 3, and we have none other than Sermia. And Sermia is a unit that is actually dear and near to my heart. I actually at one point used to run a speed Sermia at 240 speed with very, very, very good offensive gear. And this unit does so much damage, right? Like so much damage. Why? Her S2 allows her to actually get a nice little gap, right? Which is the greater attack buff. And then you're able to come in with a S3 that is able to penetrate defense by 50%. This skill, at its peak, I remember I was almost one-shotting Ruels, right? Like the 1900 HP Ruels, it was doing 19 to 20k HP onto them. And that was before penetration set was a thing, right? I was using her with crit set, right? So I can't imagine the old Sermia build that I used to have. If I actually was to get a pen set on her, I would pretty much be able to have a speedy one-shotter that is able to get a barrier on herself when she has 2s and do a lot of damage. Now, I do not recommend her for RTA because her gear requirements are very high and very, very high. And there, again, as I mentioned, there are a lot of speed threads that can easily go before Sermia, which is another reason why we don't see units like Tamara Luluka. She has 0 protection, and if you're using her for all damage and she doesn't get that turn 1, she's kind of screwed, right? So it's one of those units that in theory could be incredibly amazing, but in practice not as much. But in Guild Wars, again, if they have a team that's a little bit on the slower side, Sermia is actually a very solid option. I actually used to use her quite a lot back in the day, but that gear got shifted around a little bit. Very solid one-shotter for at least Guild Wars, and can have a very, very high single target damage potential. At number 2, we have none other than one of my favorite units in this game, and it's going to be none other than Remnant Violet, if I can find them. Why can I not find Remnant Violet? Oh, there he is. So, Remnant Violet. This unit does insane amounts of single target damage, being able to penetrate defense by 50%, having a crit rate imprint, which easily helps you actually build the damage, and getting self-attack buff before doing the attack penetration, and just having incredibly nice ratios. Makes Violet one of the best one-shot units that you can actually get, and he's actually going to be quite meta, right? He's actually one of those units that has waves where he's either really good or kind of mediocre, but at the end of the day, right now, he's an incredible one-shotter who can one-shot Lions for breakfast, who threatens any squishy unit because 1 is 3 and they are going to get deleted. And out of the one-shotters, is arguably going to be one of the most viable for how much damage he does, with Rimo being the other one that is going to be one of the most viable for RTA, for Guild Wars, for Arena, just for any content that you need him to actually, for PvP content that you need him to one-shot, he is going to be there for you, as well as having very solid S1 follow-up damage afterwards. Just an incredibly good unit, and the evasion, of course, letting him actually use his single target damage skills. But that is going to bring us to the number 1, and we have none other than Strassing. When it comes to one-shotting, no one does select Strassing. The conditions are really easy to meet. It can easily get to a point where you can one-shot any knight in this game because you're going to be penetrating the defense by 100%. And unlike Watcher Shuri, you are not going to have that stat restriction of being a 4-star. You're going to have a full 5-star power level, and this skill just does some insane amount of damage. If you need a unit dead, it will die. Granted, you're not able to actually pick your target with Strassing. It is a little bit more conditional, but as far as one-shotting with the least amount of setup, this unit is the one. He can just come into the fight, as 3, boom, there goes a unit, almost without fail. There are very few times that you don't kill with Strassing, and if you don't kill, it's because your Strassing is not built properly, right? That's just literally what it comes down to. Your Strassing should pretty much kill any tank in this game, just because of how high this S3 damage will do with 100% penetration. Easily do 25, 27, 8k damage just raw to the knight, right? Or to the tank. Which at the end of the day is why he's going to be one of the best one-shotters. Incredible for Guild Wars. Probably one of the best cleave units for Guild Wars because you just essentially make it a 3v2. And at that point, you're probably winning the game. In RTA, a little bit harder, again, because there are a lot of current speed threads. But as a last pick option into a very tanky team, it's still a very good, solid option, right? Because you can just slap them on there and tell the opponent, hey, we're either going to have a 3v4 because you can't outspeed me, or, you know, we'll have to see. But that is going to be all I got for you guys today. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Peace.